you for joining at the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston this morning as we join with other UU congregation for today's special UU the Vote worship service. I'm Mary Cook.
And I'm Ron Cookston.
And we've been members for 19 years. We're also working to make sure as many people as possible vote in the upcoming election.
Reverend Cooper's sermon this morning is titled, Vote Love, Defeat Hate. UUs have long advocated for the use of the democratic process in voting our values. In this service, we will aim to provide hope, inspiration, and encouragement as we ground ourselves in faith and roll up our sleeves to bring our values to the public square in the 2020 election. He is joined by Karen Spear, voting justice organizer, Alex Kimming, family ministry coordinator, and Christian Holmes, AV technician. Music director Mark Vogel is joined this week by guest soloist Dr. Jolie Rock.
Some of you may be new to this congregation or the online services, so let us say a few words about Unitarian Universalism. We are a faith community that believes we do not need to think alike to love alike, and that how we live our lives is ultimately more important than what we profess to believe. We are a faith community that recognizes the importance of fellowship and cooperation, and within this community, we support one another's individual search for truth, meaning, and spiritual growth. We are a faith community that welcomes you to our worship service virtually this morning and in person as soon as possible. We hope you find this time together a source of comfort and clarity. Thank you for joining us.
We now invite you to hear our call to worship.
We gather together as a faith community once again. We gather today because we need the healing and hope that comes from being with others. We gather together to lend others the healing and hope that they need. And we gather together to join strength with these others so that we might lend the world the healing and hope that it needs. We gather together as a faith community once again. Come, let us worship together.
Celebremos compartiendo nuestras vidas, encendiendo esta luz. Unidos en el misterio de la hora, unidos ya en un gran cuerpo, unidos ya en la lucha triunfadora, Espíritu ven. Unidos en el misterio de la hora, unidos ya en el misterio de la hora, unidos ya en la lucha triunfadora, unidos ya en el misterio 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 triunfadora.
Please join with me in the spirit that some call meditation and others name prayer. Make yourself comfortable. Relax. Take one deep breath and then another. Open your mind. Open your heart. Spirit of life and love, God of many names, and mystery beyond all our naming. We come today looking to be held as we continue to experience a whirlwind of emotions. Each day brings new struggles with the pandemic, with the events in the world, with the results of global warming. We know that we were never guaranteed an absence of struggles, grief, and anxieties in our lives. That was not the promise. But we hear the words of the psalmist, who reminds us that although we walk through the darkest valley, you are there beside us to comfort us in our fears. Remind us to be patient with ourselves, even as you are patient with us. Teach us to be patient and gentle with others, even as we learn to be gentle with ourselves. Because in these days, we do feel afraid. We feel anxious. We feel vulnerable. We feel isolated. As these weeks have turned into months, we grieve. We grieve for so many reasons, and especially for so many people, and for ourselves, and what we have lost, and what and who we may lose. But we know we're not doing this alone. Help us to focus less on that which is lost during this time, and more on that which is found. May we find joy in the quietness, the joy in the solitude, the joy in slowing down. May we find appreciation for those in our world whose hard work was once taken for granted. And may we find the will to fight for their ability to make a living wage. May we find appreciation for our planet, whose sacredness and beauty were once taken for granted. And may we find the will to fight for its and our recovery. May we find the time to connect more often and more deeply with those we love, and find the words to tell them how we feel. And may we learn to be honest with our feelings, even as that honesty makes us vulnerable to this whirlwind of emotions. We pray in the names of all those known and unknown, present and absent, remembered and forgotten. We pray in the names of all helpers of humankind. May the congregation, absent in body, though present in spirit, say Amen. We pause now together to lift up that which sits heavy and light on our hearts. We mourn with UUs across the country for the loss of Alandria Williams, a leader in our faith we lost much too soon. We send love to E's parents, brother, and entire family, as well as the congregation at the Tennessee Valley UU Church. I invite you now to say the name or bring to mind those you wish to be held by the loving embrace of this religious community. They are part of this great cloud of witness and memory, and we will, even if we do not know their names, hold them in our hearts. In this great cloud of witness and memory, amid this beloved community, we hear these names and hold them in our hearts. Let us remember the suffering and joy amid and among our community that we do not know. we pause in awe and wonder of the mystery that is life. In the spirit of love, in the spirit of hope, and in the spirit of compassion, I invite each of you to enter into a time of silent prayer, meditation, or reflection.
In the quiet of this place, let this moment fill with grace. This is my prayer, this is my prayer. May the sense of mystery guide us through our journey. This is my prayer, this is my prayer. This is my prayer.
This morning's shared offering will go to support our church's voting justice efforts. UUs have long advocated for the democratic process in voting our values. Your generosity will help provide funds to increase our voice by the purchasing of stamps, stationery, and postcards for communicating and encouraging the power of our vote. Gas cards to help transport voters to the polls and to promote our belief. Vote love, not hate. Our regular Sunday morning offering collection invites us to weave a tapestry of love and action. And today, through our shared offering to our church's voting justice efforts, you are doing just that, providing the necessary threads so that we can demonstrate the love of this community for all its members through our actions and our belief that everyone has a voice that deserves to be heard. And so I would like to ask you to give generously. An offering will now be gratefully received.
Reflection on the Fifth Principle by Reverend Parisa Parsa. In our religious lives, the democratic process requires trust in the development of each individual conscience, a belief that such development is possible for each of us, as well as a commitment to cultivate our own conscience. We could call it a commitment to the value of each person. In the words of Theodore Parker, democracy means not I am as good as you are, but you are as good as I am. My connection with the sacred is only as precious as my willingness to acknowledge the same connection in others.
Prayer Ballot by Luke Stevens Royer. I walk in as on pilgrimage. The altar cloths are red, white, and blue. The ushers are the women who have been running these things, who have been running everything since before I was born. I'm handed the ballot like a scroll because the questions seem that important, ancient and modern, of what my God and country ask of me. Who? Who for commissioner, mayor, president? Who for District 8, Ward 7, school board? Who will do justice, love, mercy, and walk humbly? I make my mark with at least a shred of hope that something good will come from this. And regardless, I remember the world won't be destroyed entirely by this. The world won't be saved entirely by this. Marking my vote is like kneeling in prayer, because neither will accomplish anything right away. But the purpose of both is to remind me of my deepest hope for the world that I am trying to help create. So I rise from prayer and turn in my ballot and remember the who is me and us and we the people. And again I set to the task that is mine: justice, mercy, humble service in my small corner of the world.
Shall we gather by the river, where bright angels' feet have trod, with its crystal tide forever flowing by the throne of God? Yes, we'll gather by the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints by the river that flows by the throne of God. Soon we'll reach the shining river. Soon our pilgrimage will cease. Soon our happy hearts will quiver with the melody of peace. Yes, we will gather by the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints by the river that flows by the throne of God. That flows by the throne of God.
The prophet Amos in the Hebrew Bible rebuked the powerful of his day and summoned, "But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." This month, we have looked at various qualities of our theme, water, usually its ability to connect and ground us. But one only need to look at the Grand Canyon to see the persistence of water, or Niagara Falls to see the power of water. Small wonder Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. quoted the prophet Amos when, looking at the events of his day, repeated, "Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." A prophet is often described as a person who serves as a channel of communication between the human and divine worlds. Another source phrases it as a person who speaks for God or a deity. Prophets have often been regarded as predictors of the future and moral and ethical innovators. But prophets were usually more intent on forthtelling, speaking to present circumstances, than to foretelling, speaking to future ones. And indeed, today I'm mostly using it in that sense of forthtelling, speaking truth to power. The word justice, or more specifically, a loss of justice, has been on many of our minds lately. Last week, Dr. Bosson paid tribute to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whom much of the country is mourning. At her memorial in the U.S. Capitol building Friday morning, Rabbi Lauren Holtzflat also referenced the Hebrew Bible, reading from the book of Deuteronomy. You shall appoint judges and officials throughout your tribes, in all your towns that the Lord your God is giving you, and they shall render just decisions for the people. You must not distort justice. You must not show partiality. Justice, and only justice, you shall pursue, so that you may live and occupy the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Another loss of justice occurred in Louisville this week. When an innocent person is murdered while sleeping in her bed, and those who perpetrated the crime are not even charged, let alone prosecuted, it leaves many wondering, where is justice? When the president refuses to commit to a peaceful transition of power, it leaves many asking, will there be justice? During this pandemic, when record numbers of people have lost their jobs, incomes, and homes, it's been a bonanza for billionaires. The top 1% owns 31% of the nation's wealth, and the richest 1/10 own more than 2/3. The obscene wealth gap has widened. This has not gone unnoticed by our most current prophet in the mold of Amos and Dr. King, Dr. William J. Barber. He created Moral Mondays and is leading the Poor People's Campaign, a revival of Dr. King's Poor People's March on Washington. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Justice has been defined as the maintenance or administration of what is just, reasonable, or righteous. Justice is one of the first items mentioned as a strong value and moral teaching in our Unitarian Universalist principles. Our 7 principles are guides that point to values that are important for those of us who gather in community and to reference as we work toward a better world. In fact, we might reference them when we speak of voting our values. More on that in just a few minutes. These principles were first adopted in 1960 in preparation for the Universalist Church of America and the American Unitarian Association's consolidation in 1961. Originally 6 principles, these were modified through much effort in 1985, spearheaded by the UU Women's Federation, and became the 7 principles and 6 sources we find to this day in the front of our gray hymnal. The longer I work with the principles and sources, the more I realize how interconnected they seem to be. It reminds me a bit of those theorems in high school geometry class. If this and this are true, then this must be true as well. If those 2 angles are 45 degrees, then that one must be 90. If we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, surely we believe in justice and equity and compassion in human relations. And if those are true, How can we deny the use of the democratic process? And it is the fifth source that states that we affirm and promote the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. Unitarians' propensity toward democracy is credited by some as to why this country was founded the way it was. The religious beliefs of the founding fathers varied from Christian deist to Unitarian to non-Christian deist to Orthodox Christians and evangelical Christians to those mostly influenced by the reason-centered Enlightenment. But despite what some modern-day evangelicals might have us believe, scholars trained in research universities have generally argued that the majority of the founders were religious rationalists or Unitarians. As a democratic republic, we have a written constitution of basic rights that is intended to protect the minority from being completely unrepresented or abused by the majority. All eligible citizens get equal say in decisions through elected representatives. The phrase elected representatives led me to think of the verses Rabbi Holtzblatt quoted from Deuteronomy. You shall appoint judges and officials throughout your tribes, and they shall render just decisions for the people. This suggests that we are to not only vote our values, but vote for those who will uphold our value of justice. Of course, when we say all eligible citizens get equal say in decisions through elected representatives, who is eligible is the question. I recently preached a sermon that celebrated the 100th anniversary of women gaining the right to vote in this country. Women and people of color were blatantly kept from casting ballots for as long as possible. Then more underhanded ways were introduced. Poll taxes, literacy tests, and changing the dates and times of polling stations were common tactics. Today, voter rolls of minorities are purged for questionable reasons, and gerrymandering ensures predetermined outcomes. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, a New York-based think tank and civil rights advocacy organization, since 2010 alone, 21 states have passed new laws making it more difficult to vote. Unitarians and Universalists are and were more inclined to believe in the right of all people to vote. Right after the last presidential election, an acquaintance from high school took issue with something I wrote on Facebook about the Electoral College and the winner of the popular vote not winning the presidency. He made the statement that, well, if we omitted the votes of California, the winner of the popular vote did win, and we certainly didn't want to follow the lead of liberal California in anything. He didn't seem to realize or want to admit that if you don't want people who aren't like you or believe like you to vote, you aren't really for democracy. And of course, more than a few people wonder if the Electoral College isn't simply a way to have the votes of people who believe like those in power count more. Not allowing everyone in the United States to vote has caused many to point out that the phrase, all men are created equal, simply proves the word men is not interchangeable with the word people. On June 25th, 1863, Universalist Olympia Brown became the first woman to be ordained with official approval from a national denomination. She also worked and spoke tirelessly for women's suffrage, worked with Susan B. Anthony and Lucy Stone, and formed the New England Women's Suffrage Association. She was one of the few leaders of the women's suffrage movement who lived to be able to cast a ballot in 1920. 6 years later, Unitarian favorite Henry David Thoreau wrote the essay Resistance to Civil Government, called Civil Disobedience for short. He was motivated, in part, by his disgust with slavery and the Mexican-American War. In it, Thoreau argues that individuals should not permit governments to overrule or atrophy their consciences, and that they have a duty to avoid allowing such acquiescences to enable the government to make them the agents of injustice. Thoreau not only seemed to be foreshadowing our fifth principle, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process, he seemed to be echoing the writer of the book of Deuteronomy. Justice and only justice you shall pursue. Today, many Unitarian Universalist congregations are coming together for special UU the Vote worship services named Vote Love, Defeat Hate. It is part of the Unitarian Universalist Association UU the Vote campaign. UU the Vote is a nationwide effort led by the president of the UUA, Susan Frederick Gray, to encourage as many people to vote as possible. You may have taken part in Wednesday's Gather the Spirit web event, where 800 people from all over the country multiplied their enthusiasm and learned what others are doing to get out the vote. You may have seen my Ministers Forum Wednesday with Karen Spear, our voting justice organizer, who talked about all our efforts to mobilize as many people as possible to vote this election. If you haven't seen it yet, please watch it. Karen talked about her mom instilling in her the importance of voting when she was young. That led me to think back. I remember in the 6th grade, my school back in Kentucky was a polling place. The voting machines were set up in the hall outside our classroom, and during the slow part of the day, we were shown how the machines worked. My parents actually worked the polls for several years, following in the footsteps of my dad's mother. My grandmother worked the polls for well over 50 years. None of us can remember exactly how long. My grandmother's favorite story was telling a police officer, "This time I get to ask you for your ID." The story is even funnier if you know how fast my grandma drove. In the Ministers' Forum previous to mine with Karen, Dr. Bosson spoke to Susan Leslie, Congregational Advocacy and Witness Director at the Unitarian Universalist Association, about how to vote, love, not hate, and voting justice. Not long after it was posted, a viewer, someone we didn't know, posted 2 questions in the comments section asking about the political involvement of UU churches and how that affects their tax status. Never being 100% sure if someone is asking an honest question or if they're trolling us to get a rise out of us, I debated whether to respond. Well, I decided to reply with a rather by-the-book explanation of how, as a church, we are tax exempt, and that I believed as such, we take very seriously the rule to not endorse candidates. I couldn't help but add that I had seen evidence that other churches didn't seem to take that rule as seriously as we do. But then I added, we are currently working diligently on a campaign to get out the vote, encouraging everyone, no matter their beliefs or political affiliation, to vote this election. Embodying and working for our values in the public square, which includes voting, is not only our right, but our responsibility as a faith community. We believe it is our duty to work to make this world a better place for everyone. To my surprise, the questioner responded, "That's great, thank you." I hope to make it clear to him that I believe part of our role as a faith community is working toward justice. That because we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, we believe in the use of the democratic process, and that even those we disagree with have a voice that deserves to be heard, and a vote that deserves to be counted. As former President and Texan Lyndon B. Johnson said, "The vote is the most powerful instrument ever devised for breaking down injustice and destroying the terrible walls which imprison people because they are different from other people." We believe in justice, equity, in compassion in human relations, and in using those and our conscience to vote our values. As I've described to you, it is in our Unitarian Universalist DNA to work for justice and to advocate for the democratic process. Because our focus is on this world, not the next, we advocate to work to bring more love, more justice, more fairness to the world, and less hate, injustice, and inequality. And that is why we are asking everyone to vote their values and vote love, so we can look forward to the day when justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream.
Once to every soul and nation comes a moment to decide. In the strife of truth with falsehood, for the good or evil side, then to stand with truth is noble when we share its wretched crust, ere that cause bring fame and profit, and 'tis prosperous to be just. Though the cause of evil prosper, yet 'tis truth alone is strong. Though its portion be the scaffold, and upon the throne be wrong, then it is the brave one chooses, while the coward stands aside, till the multitude make virtue of the faith they have denied.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
The benediction is a brief excerpt from Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau. If any think that their influence would be lost there, and their voices no longer afflict the ear of the state, that they would not be as an enemy within its walls, they do not know how much truth is stronger than errors, nor how much more eloquently and effectively he can combat injustice who has experienced a little in his own person. Cast your whole vote, not a strip of paper merely, but your whole influence. Amen, and go in peace.
While our church as buildings is closed, our church as people is still meeting, but now online. There are weekly and monthly offerings to keep you connected and engaged with our community. Join us this morning at 11:30 for coffee half hour after the service. Don't miss a chance to connect and socialize while we're apart. Grab your favorite mug and log in to interact with new and old friends. You have 2 opportunities to talk to a minister during their office hours this week. Monday at 7 with Reverend Scott and Wednesday at 2 with Reverend Colin. A series of workshops on healing racism, compassion, allyship, and acting for change continues this week. Check firstuuhouston.org for the topics for each session. Wednesday Family Gathering, designed for families with children 4 to 11, continues this week and begins at 6:30. Email carol@firstuuhouston.org for the link. Many of the topics for upcoming discussion groups are on our website, firstuuhouston.org/online-group-meetings. Visit there for more details and to sign up. And remember, all times shown are Central Daylight Time.